How's it going, guys? We're going to be talking about the greatest common factor today. So to begin, let's go over a couple definitions. So let's start with factor. So a factor, or factors, so a factor is, or is a, or are, is a number that you can multiply to get another number. Okay, so for example, here's an example. Looks like this. So 2 times 3 equals 6. So the number 2 and the number 3 are factors. All right. So next we're going to talk about the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor, well, let's take a look at what it actually says. It's the greatest, which means the biggest, common factor. So that's all it is. It's the biggest number and we'll put factor here. Factor that 2 or more numbers have in common. Okay, so someone crosses that. It's actually the biggest factor, so we'll use that one. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my method number 1. And there are 3 ways to do this, so we'll start right here with the first one. And we can start with the list. And you'll notice that these methods are very similar to least common multiple. Very similar. So let's use the same numbers we used for least common multiple. So we use the numbers, let's see, I think 12 and 8. So we'll use those ones. So we use 12 and the number's 8. So the list is we are just going to list all of the factors for 12 and list all the factors for 8 and then find the ones that are the biggest. Okay, so the ones that match the biggest. Alright, so here we go. So we're going to start with 12. And so 12, let's see. Well, there's 1, let's see, 1 times 12. Okay, I know there's like 2 times 6. And also know there's 3 times 4. Alright, and so let's do 8. So 8 looks like this. So let's do 8. And the numbers that I multiply together to get 8 are 1 times 8, my factors here. And then I also have 2 times 4. All right, so here is a very simple way to find it. So what I'm going to look for is I'm going to look for a couple numbers here that are factors, that are common. So I'm going to circle them. So a common factor is 1, and so I'm going to just circle 1 on both of them. 2 is also a common factor. They also have 2 in common, and then they also have 4 in common. So greatest common factor is the biggest number, or the biggest factor, excuse me, that 2 or more numbers have in common. So the biggest factor that they have in common is 4. So 4 is the GCF, or greatest common factor, for the numbers 12 and 8. So that's method number 1. You just make a list. The problem with making a list is you have to know all the factors. And when we get to really big numbers, finding all the factors is a little bit harder to do. So let's go with method number 2. And this one I like to call Optimus Prime factorization. Okay, so Optimus Prime factorization looks like this. All right, so I'm going to use the same two numbers. I'm going to use 12 and I'm going to use 8. And so we are going to prime factor 12 and 8. So I know that 12 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 3. Okay, and I also know that 8 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, sorry, I'm writing a little small here. I don't want to run out of room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up these factors and try to find some pairs of factors. All right, so I'm going to take 12, and 12 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 3, and 8 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2. And what I'm going to do is I am going to circle the matching ones. And I'm going to use a different color here. I'm going to use yellow. So here's a matching one. Remember how we circled them and that became 1, 2? And we circled this one and that also became 1, 2. Now, the reason why I'm only circling the pairs, and I actually only care about the matching ones, is because I'm trying to find common factors. So is this 2 and this 3 in common with each other? Well, they're not. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cross them out. So I'm going to cross these out, this 2 and this 3, because I don't need them, because they're not in common with each other. And in the end, I have this 2 and this 2, and all I have to do now is multiply them together, and 2 times 2, and my answer is 4. And we already figured out that 4 is the GCF. So up here we already figured out that 4 is the GCF because we actually made a list and figured it out that, hey, this one is the biggest. And so this is another way of figuring out that 4 is the GCF. So we're going to use another method, and I'm actually going to turn the page here. So this is method number 3 because I'm running out of room, so I'm going to turn my page over. Doesn't happen very often, but here we go. So this is method number 3. And this is called the upside down birthday cake. Okay, so on the upside down birthday cake, it looks like this. So I have my two numbers again. I have 12 and I also have 8. And like we did before, we're going to use the distributive property to pull out a common factor for 12 and 8. So I know they're both even, so I'm going to pull out a common factor of 2. And so when I pull out a common factor of 2, this 12 becomes a 6 because 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 times, I know that 2 times 4 is 8. So I'm also going to pull out another common factor between 6 and 4. And so another factor they have in common, I know they're even, so I'm going to choose 2 again. So there's 2, and so now this becomes, so 6 divided by 2, or 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 times 2 is 4. So I use the distributive property to pull out a common factor, and then I pulled out another common factor. And what I'm left with is I'm left with 3, and I'm left with 2 prime numbers down here. Now, just like on the previous page where we crossed out the ones that are not in common, so 3 and 2 are factors that are not in common. And that's in the end. Okay, and my factors in common are these guys. Factors. So now to find my greatest common factor, I take my 2 from up here, And then I take my other 2 from over here, and I multiply those 2 together. And so this, again, equals 4. And we know from our list that 4 is the GCF for 12 and 8. Okay, so hopefully that helps, and yeah, we'll see you guys in my next video.